Can you hear me?
I can.
There we go. First time I've done this. I've taught some classes like that, but there we go.
Do you have a camera you want to turn on, Dan?
Oh, I thought I had it on. Let me see.
There's a little icon where you can turn it on and off.
There it is.
We use it at work a lot, and we've been working remotely and whatnot. So if you're in your pajamas, you don't have to have the cam on. Perfect. I'm glad we could catch up for a little bit here, Dan.
Yep. Been looking forward to take a break.
Yeah, it's, all the crazy stuff going on. I was thinking the same. I'm like, I guess it's good a time as any.
Try to get back to reality.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can do. And after that, we got to turn it over to the good Lord and hope for the best.
It's out of our hands at that point.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well,
it's good to see you again, bro. I haven't seen you, about a year now?
Yeah, I was looking back. I think it was 2019 summer. The only reason I know that is because I looked back through and there was a picture of my kids with your dog, and then there was you and me hanging out in the backyard.
Yeah, I seen that.
2019. That's the only reason I knew. The thing dated the picture.
It's a year and a half ago, I believe. But well, what's up?
Well,
we're gonna work on cars, right?
Yeah. You want to kick off and how did you get into beekeeping? Like, just briefly, how did you get into beekeeping? How'd you get into breeding bees? That's what I knew you for, is breeding.
Well, it's sort of a backdoor way of doing something I've been wanting to do my whole life. When I got into it, I studied everything I could get my hands on since I was a kid. And then I got in the military and I had a bad parachute jump and broke my back. And what I did then was I had a doctor, an old country doctor, that says, you need to keep bees, you need to keep bees. Well, at that time, my left thigh was about 1.5 inches smaller in circumference or diameter than my other leg, and I couldn't lift it up, and I was in constant pain. And I said, yeah, that's what I need to do, is get in beekeeping. And although my heart was in it, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. And so what happened was my oldest son, I can't remember exactly how it was, but he started bugging me about beekeeping. And he was big enough that he could help do this and do it himself, and I thought, well, this is one way I can sort of get into beekeeping, and he can do the heavy lifting if necessary. Mm-hmm. So he was the catalyst, and we went down to Fred Rossman and in a car and bought 3 packages. And at that point in time, I had already built 2 Langstroth and 1 top bar hive. Mm-hmm. And they were ready to occupy, and went down to, where is that? Moultrie, Georgia. Fred was real helpful. We had a great time visiting. It was real hot, and we had no place to really put it in the car. Tried to find air conditioning, to keep the bees cool. Well, we got them there, and we were located in Columbus, Georgia, so it was a drive. And at that time, we were in Columbus, Georgia, and we got them installed. And there's things you learn the hard way. And I remember I thought, well, I'll save money and just buy one of these kits for starter beekeepers. And some sadistic SOB come up with this idea that those felt gloves that come in the kits were a real good idea. And that's what I started with. Well, what happened was, what bees are going to do with felt, especially after a couple stings. And I was getting ate up. And I noticed that, yeah, I mean, I was getting stung like a lot. And even on today's standards for me. And I also noticed that they were stinging me down in the small of my back, which is where the break was at, and on my right wrist, which I had problems there.
Really?
And yeah, it was one of those things. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's what's going on. Because I'd heard about bees can sense, their sense of smell, which is 100,000 times stronger than ours, I believe is the correct number. I could be off on that, but 10,000 times stronger than a grizzly bear. And they've actually used them to find cancer. They've used them to find non-metallic landmines.
I've heard that.
Iraq, and yeah.
That's insane. So what do you think they were smelling on your?
Some disease problem, inflammation or irritation.
It could be that.
And since then, I've had people say the same thing. So I don't think it's just my imagination. But all of a sudden, my legs started. I noticed one day that it wasn't hurting anymore, and I wasn't looking for it. And I was sleeping through the night. That was my first indicator, because before I'd get maybe 4 hours, 5 hours sleep at the most, and before I had to get up. And by golly, I was sleeping 6, 7 hours, and my mood got better. And my wife was very thankful for that. So but
that's awesome.
So that's sort of the way I got started. And I've always been breeding something since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I had a fish hatchery, and we had 19 breeding lines, and that was fun because
that's cool.
Yeah, the turnover is much quicker than with honeybees, as you know.
Yeah.
And I was able to see phenotypic changes rapidly.
Yeah.
And quick. A lot of work, but a lot of effort goes into it. And when you're hurting, it was pretty hard.
Yeah.
But anyway, my first wife had enough of my craziness, and she'd left. And so I had to drop that business for a period of time. And by that point in time, I lost all my breeding lines. Auburn University received them, and they actually signed me up. Wow. Yeah, I had some pretty phenomenal breeding work done with those lines. And the fisheries department, head of department, actually signed me up. I didn't have to go through administration or anything. He put me in that school that day because I had solved a problem that they had been working on. I'm not bragging here. I'm just telling you, it was a neat story. Well, with fish, you have suspended solids. In other words, poop floating around. And it has different types of bacteria that causes problems within the gill filaments. And any kind of stress with fish, that slows down their growth, makes them more susceptible to disease, et cetera. Mm. And I had solved how to do that at a small scale. Well, they were working mainly thinking about catfish and food fish, tilapia, which is quite a bit more, but they were trying to find a way of removing more effectively suspended solids. And I was out there looking at their ponds, and he happened to be there with one of his PhD students at the time, who was a good friend of mine. That's how we got introduced. And his name happened to be Rogers also, but the head of the department was Rogers at the time too at Auburn. And he said that I can't remember exact conversation, so I might mess it up a little bit, but I see you're trying to remove the suspended solids in this pond. It was a big pond. And he says, yeah, he went off into it and told me how it doesn't work and why they just don't know. And I said, and I had one that was working. And I said, well, I got one that's working. And he says, no way. He didn't believe me. He thought I was just being a dumbass, excuse my French, redneck. And, and I said, I happen to have my briefcase because when my wife left, I had to leave too, fish farm and all. It was just a nightmare for me. But I had my briefcase and half of my living stuff, not all of it, but a lot of stuff in my truck, and my truck was just sitting right there 100 yards from us. And I said, I got pictures of it right here. So I took it to him and showed him, and he said he couldn't believe it. And he wanted to sign me up in his fisheries department right then. And believe it or not, to keep my sanity, because I really love this woman and my two boys, I decided to come up to Auburn. I was there for that, to get enrolled, hopefully in the fisheries department. And he didn't know that. And I think at that time, I did not even know that he was the head of the department. And when I found out he was, it changed my whole demeanor.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in front of his desk in his office, and he was filling out the paperwork. And anyway, they got my breeding lines, and the fish that I was doing were ornamentals, and I was it was fun. I had a lot of fun with them. I created I don't know if you're familiar with a double dark recessive fish or anything double recessive.
Like a black goldfish, kind of?
Yeah. It was
Is it a coloration gene, or what is it?
It was a coloration, and it was a double dark recessive. And that particular trait, which quite often happens with anything that's homozygous recessive, double recessive, are weaker usually.
Okay.
And lots of times that's because they've been bred to the point where they lost their hybrid vigor, or it's just a trait of the double recessive. Well, that happened to be the case in this particular species of fish, and they were extremely weak. If you got 10 to 15% of them survive to adulthood, yeah, you were doing real good. And they were always sickly, but they were beautiful. They looked like slabs of velvet.
Wow.
And well, what I did was I went about it in a backwards way. I picked up heterozygous, actually it was a homozygous dominant fish that was marble, and I started breeding out the white.
Okay.
And I actually developed the two crosses I had resulted in what was a heterozygous cross, but they throwed 100% slabs of black velvet.
Nice.
And
that's awesome.
It protected my work too, because then other people were thinking that they could breed the two together, and you know what happens when you cross two heterozygous.
Yeah.
And so
it didn't work out for them.
Yeah, it wasn't like what they did to me. It wasn't like the pricks that stole my bees later on, but
that's what I've said too, is that's the problem with bees, is even if you invest all this time into breeding work, they're so easy to knock off, and there's no way of tracking it. You can, I mean, basically you're doing it because somebody needs to do it, not because you're going to be immensely profiting from it. But how'd you implement that into your bees? Like, what was your approach on breeding them to be sturdier? And
well, like I said, I always was interested in breeding. I did fish off and on quite a bit.
Yeah.
And when I started my breeding, when I was, my mom or my dad tells me, and my sister tells me I was 6 years old, I had praying mantises.
Yeah.
And I was tying them to a bush, and I like the brown, there's two morphs of the giant praying mantis. There's a brown one and a green one.
Green one, yep. Mm-hmm.
And I like the brown ones. So I bred a line of brown, simple. It was just animal husbandry was what it was. But I'd tie silk string around the neck of the mothers, and I would collect brown ones, and I would collect brown males, and that showed up pretty quickly.
That's awesome.
We had all kinds of brown praying mantises in central Indiana, and they may still be there.
They probably are. What's funny is whenever I was younger, I don't know what age, but I used to catch those big mantises too. And the thing is once they know you're not a threat, there's a level of intelligence to them. Like I used to sit and watch TV with them, and they were kind of transfixed by it. And you
They're
could
amazing creatures.
oh my gosh, they are. And you could literally, once they've been around you a while, hand them a grasshopper and they just nonchalantly take it.
Yeah, I love them.
It's crazy.
I got to tell you another quick story with praying mantises. When I was in second grade, this is before I knew a whole lot about baby praying mantises. Second grade, Mrs. Gillum said, we could bring in show and tell stuff. And I brought in 13 praying mantis egg cases in a 5-gallon aquarium with a screen top.
Yep.
And it was right before Christmas break. And instead of taking that home with me, I left it at school. And when we got back from Christmas break, there was praying mantises all over the school. I'm not kidding you. Clear down by the cafeteria, little baby things.
They're on the move.
Yeah, I was the talk of the town for a while.
That's awesome.
I remember right before we graduated second grade, I don't know what you call it, right before summer break, I was lined up for lunch and I looked over to my right and one of the windows had a praying mantis, an immature praying mantis about that long in the window and had survived. Apparently eating flies and moths and other little praying mantises. But
yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to shut up. I'm gabbing about stuff.
Well,
you asked me a question. You said, how did I turn that into? Well, I just went from one breeding thing to the next. And
yeah,
I knew that there was problems with honeybees at that time. I got in right about the time, my dog's going crazy, sorry. Right about the time that the Varroa and trachea mite hit.
Okay.
I mean, we were still using menthol patties and Crisco and all kinds of craziness. And well, besides it healing my back, of course, I decided I had to, my wife's coming in, so if you hear something, I decided I had to start breeding these things, because if I'm going to have something that's biological, I'm going to be breeding it.
Yeah, same here.
I mean, oh yeah, I love breeding, working on the genetics. Did dogs too with my dad a little bit, but
yeah.
Anyway, so I got real intrigued with the problems that were happening, and oh my God, I went off on a passion like I haven't had in a long time.
Yep.
I seen some big mistakes that were being made in the breeding community at the university level. Mm-hmm. And it's a dang shame, because we had a golden opportunity when the Varroa and trachea mite hit to really locate and breed with survivor colonies before they bred themselves out of existence from inbreeding, and the loss of sex allele count.
Yep.
But we didn't do that, because the first thing that the university guys wanted to do was a magic pill type thinking.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And by the time they figured out a breeding program would work, I think Jeff Harbaugh was behind that down in Beltsville, I believe. And I know it was Harbaugh, he tried it, but I checked out his procedures and I see where he made a couple mistakes.
Yeah.
And I know you can't say that about doctors. But
are you not supposed to?
But you know me, I did it on a regular basis.
As a matter of principle.
Oh yeah, they used to line up in the back of the places I speak when I was speaking, and used to piss them off, but they wanted to hear what I had to say, because the guys are like laser beams, but as far as creative thinking, they're not.
You're
all
exactly
of them are
right.
There's a few of them that are pretty creative in thinking, Dennis Anderson, Dave Tarpey. I've always said that Tarpey is I don't know where he's at now, if he's
I don't know him
controlled.
personally. I know the
He
name.
was out of University of North Carolina. Walt Shepard, Steve Shepard, out of University of Washington Pullman. These are leaders.
Yeah.
They were good guys. Steve Tabor, back when.
Yeah, I've got his book. It's great. Breeding super bees.
Yep. Now, he wasn't a doctor, and he was cantankerous, so I'll get out.
That's why he was a good beekeeper. He didn't give up. He was stubborn.
I know. He didn't put up with a lot of the political crap, which I have never seen politics like I've seen in beekeeping. And I was an officer in the Army, so I seen a lot of politics.
Yeah.
But they look like Girl Scouts compared to the politics that go into beekeeping. That's actually what got me out of it for several years. The baloney. I mean,
yeah.
Anyway, that's another sad story. But gosh, where did I go with that? I'm sorry, I'm meandering all.
Oh no, you're fine. That's the beauty of conversation. Whenever you started working or trying to get stuff that was more resistant, did you like purchase something in particular to start with, or did you just work with what you had, or like how'd you start?
Well, one of my first interests, there was a couple of them. Like, I'm a strong believer in start with good stock.
Yeah.
Why you can do it the other way, but it's usually takes
harder.
Years.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there was a couple people on the horizon that I was interested. Marla Spivak out of University of Minnesota's that bee that she was working with, the Minnesota Hygienic, and Sue Kobe's New World Carniolan. And there was a guy out of Washington that claimed he had a Caucasian bee that had some traits that I wanted to pick up.
Was that Old Soul? Is he still
Yeah,
around?
it was something like that.
Yeah, because they've been at it for a while. Because I remember them, and I think they still have advertisements in ABJ and stuff.
Really?
I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking they're still at it.
Well, I can tell you, 25 years ago, I didn't do the DNA on it to prove it, and at that time you wouldn't be able to tell. But
yeah,
the Caucasian, according to all the phenotypic markers that I've heard about and read about, that bee was a Caucasian bee that he was selling.
Oh wow, cool.
And anyway, those guys started my attention. There was somebody else too. I can't think of what it was. Oh, the SVP, I can't remember. Shit.
It wasn't SMR, some of the
SMR,
the press mite reproduction.
Yeah, that caught my attention.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, some of the best marketers in beekeeping was the USDA bee labs.
Yeah, exactly.
They had a
they got
pitch.
money and PhDs. Those are attention getters.
Well, they were good talkers too.
Yeah.
They could come up with a line of sales pitch, and I learned that the hard way. After a couple times, I got burnt. I went down that rabbit hole with them, and I finally realized that wasn't the case in a lot of what they were saying. But
yeah,
I tried that line, but here's what ended up happening, and I realized that to breed honeybees, it was 180 degrees different than breeding fish.
Mm-hmm.
The turnover was a lot slower. It takes a whole year, in my opinion, to evaluate one genetic example. And so with a fish, I could breed 700 to 900 phenotypic examples every 6 weeks with one breeding line, one pair.
Rapid changes.
And I could breed those every week.
Wow.
So, I got a lot of selection that I could do. And so I came up with this I like to start my own lingo lots of times, but I came up with this term, vertical and horizontal breeding programs. And it's sort of a picture, but a horizontal breeding program is similar to what beekeeping is. Vertical is what fish keeping was, because, you know, like with beekeeping or with fish, let's say you have a handful of dice and you throw it up against the wall as fast as you can, pick them up, throw them down, pick them up, throw them down, and you're counting the sixes. With beekeeping, you fill a 5-gallon bucket with dice and you roll it.
Yeah.
You know, you roll it
Yeah.
once a year.
Yeah.
And you count all the sixes.
Right.
Well,
That makes
that's
sense.
that's the way I sort of started seeing it. And about the same time, I was working not actually working, I was helping an old beekeeper. I wasn't getting paid or nothing like that, but it was an old beekeeper who came out of Delano, Florida. And he actually knew the largest beekeeper in the world for quite a few years. I can't think of his name. He worked with him. He was from Delano. Anyway, I'll think of his name later, maybe. The guy tried to get some of my breeding stock one time. He wanted me to produce bees for him exclusively, and I told him that ain't happening because I got people that want one queen and they come before you because they got on the list first. He didn't like that crap. But anyway, what I started noticing when I was going around to these different Smoky Mountain area, Southern Appalachian area, beehives. I was working these things and these yards, and I learned a lot from those hillbilly beekeepers because they didn't have medicine. They didn't have the money for medicine. They didn't have the money to buy the equipment, and yet they needed the honey, and they produced the finest sourwood honey, which has been.
I love sourwood. That's my fave.
Well, right where I was located, the primo of the crop. I've seen somebody did a USDA map, and I believe it, because I've seen all kinds of sourwood honey in my life. And there's a kidney bean shaped. It's about 30 miles long and about, I don't know, 10 miles wide, if that. And it's our house was located right in the center of that kidney bean.
Was it really?
Oh yeah, that pure sourwood. Pure sourwood has a lavender tint to it, and it's real thin. And in fact, you have to be careful with fermentation with it. And
I got a little bit of comb. I've had it out of Tennessee, and I think this come out of Virginia possibly. And it was slightly different, but you could tell it was the same floral source. But it had a big old chunk of comb in it. The last one I had, it was wonderful.
I wished I could get some of that. I know where I could get some because I taught a guy beekeeping, helped him get started in it. He's a real good beekeeper. He's one of the largest beekeepers in North Georgia right now, right there where we're located. And he produces some of the finest sourwood that the country knows.
Nice.
And if you ever want to try the real stuff, call him up and I'll give you his phone number. His name's Josh Berry of Berry Bee Farms.
Okay.
And ask him for the sourwood when it's lavender flavored or lavender colored sourwood. And if you don't have it, not every year do you get it, but usually you do. And that's the primo stuff. Yeah. Now it's like real tupelo. A lot of people don't know it, but it's greenish in color.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a tint. And it's like tulip poplar honey, which was another crop that you would get in the Smoky Mountain region. Pure tupelo or tulip poplar honey was red. It was a deep red, like a wine red. But Tupelo honey is one of my favorites too. And it's funny because they're both fructose-based honeys.
Are they really?
Yeah. And anyway, I got off track again. I do that a lot the older I get.
I think I derailed this with my love for Sourwood. You were talking about you work with some older guys.
Oh, I know what happened.
They were kind of practical and they weren't necessarily medicating. And
there was things that they were doing that I was picking up on. And because, see, up to that point in time, all I had was book experience. Mm-hmm. And I was also good at picking bees up by the wings off the clover heads back before the trachea and Varroa mite hit.
Yeah.
A lot of people, you know, the feral population was so massive back in those days.
It was.
I mean, I'm not kidding you. In central Indiana, in town, you'd have Dutch clover on the yards, and every clover head would have a bee or two hovering around that thing.
Yep.
And nowadays, you could stomp through that clover yard barefoot.
You'd be fine.
And never get hit. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I used to open a lot of my speaking engagements with all you old timers. I'm going to take you back. Just close your eyes and listen to this. Insert your name instead of mine. Danny Kent, put your shoes on. You're going to step on a bee.
Yeah.
And I'd watch them and they had their eyes closed. It was great. Yeah. And I'd see big old smiles come out on their faces.
That's true.
You know, and then grandma would get the tobacco juice and all kinds of craziness out. And, you know, none of that worked. But anyway, so I'm going around learning practical beekeeping from these guys and doing a lot of it on my own. Honestly, I give the hillbillies they're good friends, a lot of credit, but honestly, you know, and I know that the learning don't start until you start doing.
Got to get your hands dirty or the light bulb don't connect.
You can read all the books.
Yeah.
But that's why I tell people, I said, you know, I've had a lot of folks that have had two hives. I call them bee havers. I picked up that from George Imeri when he was alive. I knew George, and he was sort of a legend. He's the one that designed the Imeri shim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he was a character too. He was actually a scientist on the Manhattan Project.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
He had a lot of bee writings too, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He was another Steve Tabor type guy, very cantankerous, and but knew his stuff. And he used to there's two types of beekeeping. There's bee havers and beekeepers.
Yep.
And, you know, I don't know how many times I've been in arguments with people that have had two beehives for 50 years. And some of them learn from that, but a lot of them think just because they've had a beehive in their backyard for 10 years, they're experts. And I said, look, I would rather have a guy that worked for Richard D for 6 months than a guy who is buying bees every year for 50 years.
Exactly.
And he's keeping bees once a year 50 times. And that grates on some people's nerves because not everybody has the opportunity to go into it big scale.
Or can handle it, because that's back-breaking work. Well, you know, it's any kind of beekeeping can get laborious quick.
That was my limitation too, because of the back injury. But to get back to the original story, I started traveling around working these yards by myself, and I got to know these hillbilly owners. See, because the way you contract the yard, at least in North Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, tri-state area, is a case of honey for a yard.
Yep.
Case of quartz, or was it a case of quartz? Or yeah, I think that's what it was. It's been a while.
That's what I go by. I still go by that rule.
Well, that's a good rule, and everybody's happy.
Yep.
And so there was quite a few yards that I was going to, and I got to talking to the people, and a couple of them had kept bees, or their families had kept them for generations. Well, then the Varroa and trachea mite hit pretty much almost at the same time. And a lot of people lost bees. Well, I ran across this in the mountains. 200 hives is huge.
Yeah.
Because most of the beekeeping is done on an angle. And the Sourwood country, the rougher it is, the harder it is, the better it is. But
yeah.
I ran into an old boy that had a bunch of bee equipment. I was looking for bee equipment, right? He had it all stacked up under a lean-to. And, oh, hold on. And I noticed he had 2 beehives. And we had bee yards. I had a bee yard in his back where he used to keep bees. But one day I was walking out and I noticed all those beehives. There must have been 200 beehives. It's cross-stacked and just waiting to be used, it looked like. And I'm looking for equipment. So I said, hey, you interested in selling that? Well, anyway, we got to talking and he had 2 beehives that were still alive.
Out of all of them?
Yeah.
Oh,
and
man.
Well, what he told me was, you know, all beekeepers in those areas call them gums, bee gums. They're not hives, they're bee gums.
A log?
Yeah, well, the blue gum tree, which is a member of the tupelo family, hollows out real easy. And that's what the old timers, the hillbillies, used to go out and they would beeline, which I learned how to do that too, how to beeline feral colonies. And they would go hunt them down and then they cut the trees down and then they cut up the top at an angle and put boards on top of it, or they would cut it flat and put supers. That's what they started doing, is coming in with supers and bore a hole if they needed to in the side of the log, or it already had one, you know, that kind of thing. And well, I don't know why I'm telling you all that, but I started seeing these beehives, and his in particular, because at that point I was on my Minnesota hygienic kick.
Yeah.
And I was convinced that that was the answer. I wasn't real knowledgeable at the time, but I was going to find out. And so I started breeding for hygienic behavior, and I used liquid nitrogen.
That's awesome.
And pinprick, both methods.
Which one do you like, one better than the other?
Well, if you really want to do it well, you need to do both, in my opinion. But, and I hope I don't know, I don't want to step in anybody's toes, but if I had to give a weight to hygienic behavior, I'd give it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah.
For survival.
Okay. Yep. I like that.
I was wanting to breed for survival. And my argument was, and I used it for years, the best genetic trait, there's 2 types of genetic collections to breed against brood disease. One is a 3-gene trait, as you know, a polygenic trait of locating, uncapping, and removing the brood of diseased brood. Well, that works, but it's not real effective in my opinion. The other, for instance, foul brood, is where am I going with this? Was now I'm crossing my wires here. It's been a while since I've done it. Well, I'll come back to that other one. I'm messing it up here. I just realized you get older and you forget things.
I'm already there, Dan. I heard it doesn't get me better.
It don't, but it gets funnier. So that's the way it has to go.
So what would you put, or what's above that hygienic? Like, what are they missing? What's the missing piece of it?
I think the most valuable trait I actually picked up. I was one of the first ones to receive. I received 6 lines of the Russians, the original Russians.
Yep.
Which I have a theory on that Russian bee. I got a theory on that will piss everybody off. But
I've never messed with them.
Well, I can tell you, they carry some powerful a powerful genetic trait, or they did. They're so far removed from the original bees, and the original Russian
survivors?
line. No, that's
No.
what they were, but they carried a trait that contributed to survival. And the USDA had a brilliant idea of going over and collecting known survivor queens and then bringing those bloodline into the United States and breeding them.
Mm-hmm.
They had a 3-step process. And the first step was to locate them and bring them in. The second was to breed them. And the third was to distribute them. Well, in the second step is where they screwed up, because they decided, at least this is what I heard from several of the breeders that I was in contact with before they shut me out, you know, because when I started talking bad about them, I wasn't popular anymore. But
you're outside the circle then.
Yeah, my mouth gets me in trouble all the time. But they were killing off the genotypes that they brought in.
Man. Yeah.
If they didn't do what they wanted, they would destroy those lines.
Yeah.
And I said, that is so stupid. I said, keep those lines going, because what we're dealing with the honeybee is what I found with them also is the genetic diversity is so critical.
Yep.
The larger that gene pool is,
the better.
The better. And what they were doing was trying to narrow down with a line breeding program, which you can't do in bees.
Yeah.
You breed them in, it's ridiculous to think that way. And I used to argue with professors on this that didn't know crap. And I could give you names off this. We used to argue. In fact, one of them got a big grant that I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, I'm not burned up like I used to be about that. But I helped him get that grant. It was supposed to be ours. But anyway, what we found was we collected a large gene pool. I called it my toolbox, my genetic toolbox. And when I was going around to these bee yards, I was in this guy's, I was working for this, helping him out, this old beekeeper that had some pretty good talent, but he had some major problems with the stock. One was they were swarmy as all get out. Now, part of that was because there were feral colonies of Mellifera mellifera in the area. Yeah.
Wow.
I had that in the Purvis Goldline too.
Did you really? Holy crap. That's cool.
They're a beautiful bee and small little thing, but smoky winged and really unique bee, meaner than hornets. But they were big time, just 50, 60 years before I started breeding. All the Smoky Mountain people, that's what they wanted.
Were they pretty conservative if the nectar shut off or something? Or what was their, what they?
The mellifera mellifera, you know, they call it the Irish bee or the German bee. German bee, I think, is the common name, moniker that goes by. But yeah, but if you go to Ireland, they'll argue and say, no, that's
it was ours.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all you need to do is get a German and an Irishman together and have them argue about bees. But, anyway, it finally dawned on me that I need to collect these genetic traits. And that one guy that had those 200 hives I got off track with, he had those 2 hives, and they were strong survivors. Not only that, but they were carrying mites, which I didn't know at the time, but I later learned about mite genetics. And the secret in being a good beekeeper is not just breeding a good bee, but breeding a good mite. And you can do that. They adapt very quickly. And I'd love to talk about that here in a minute, but I don't want to, I want to try to stay on track here. But I looked at those bees and I said, this is a gold mine, these 2 hives. Because I started talking to him, I said, how long have you had these hives? I figured they just swarmed into it. And they were right off his porch. The entrance was facing his porch. He actually had the walkway between the beehives that were right there on the sidewalk and his porch. And I said, how long have they been alive? And how long have you had them? And he says, oh, I've had them about 10, 15 years. And been keeping bees. That's how big commercially was before that. And he said they started dying off. I think it was, at that point in time, I think it was 5 years earlier. And these are the only ones I got left.
Yeah.
And I said, well, automatically, I thought, okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
You know, I'm starting to get excited. I'm getting a tickle feeling in me. But I said, well, did they die off and the swarm reoccupy them or something like that? And he goes, nope, they've been there the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, you can imagine what I was
Yeah.
thinking. And something in me just said, I'm going to ask him. And I said, can I have those queens? And he said, I said, I'll tell you what I'm doing. And I said, and I went into it a little bit. Of course, he still called them gums, so he wasn't real hip on the modern nomenclature of breeding and stuff like that. He knew how to keep bees, but he didn't understand breeding. And the old boy said, I said, look, I will get you and keep you in queens if you let me have those 2 queens. Well, he thought that was a great deal.
Oh, yeah.
And these were triple deeps, Corey. Triple deeps full of bees. It took me
big colonies.
Oh my goodness. And this was in the middle of daylight, you know, good strong honey flow coming in and pollen flow. So you had a lot of bees out working. But it still took me hours to find those queens, I believe. It seemed like hours. It was a long time, but I finally found them. And I wasn't, you know, I was at the beginning. Wasn't like after we had that queen operation where it was pulling queens every 2 minutes. But so it took me a while to find them, and I remember putting them in 2 coffee cups that I had. Yeah. Well, keep in mind, I was into Minnesota Hygienic at the time. I was thinking that was the answer to this problem. Yeah. I went through the Minnesota Hygienic, the hygienic behavior kick. And so I brought these things home. And there was a couple unique qualities about those things. And I started breeding, and at that time, I was still thinking it was hard for me to convert from mammalian genetics to bee genetics, for lack of better words. And that was before I read Bob Page's book on queen breeding, queen rearing, that he wrote with Latshaw, and where he talked about random and supersedure large closed population breeding group theory.
I think I got that book.
You got to check that out. That helped me out a lot. That is population genetics instead of a line breeding program. And he covers that pretty good, which, by the way, Bob Page had a guy try to buy some of my bees off of me later on down the year. They don't want you to know it. They don't want you to know.
No, yeah.
Because I don't have a PhD and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
But they all wanted my bees. Oh, that big beekeeper down in Delano just came to me. Horace Bell was his name.
Okay, yep.
Anyway, I got to get up and walk every once in a while. So I started breeding this bee, and I started testing them with pinprick initially, because I didn't know how to go about doing the liquid nitrogen. I knew, but I just didn't. at that point didn't have the money to go about doing it. And then I started using liquid nitrogen. I wasn't getting the consistency that I expected. I was doing control measures and repeatable tests.
Mm-hmm.
And what I ended up getting was, is that distracting me walking back and forth?
No, you're fine.
I always talk and walk better. But what I ended up doing was the pinprick method and the liquid nitrogen method. And within a short period of time, I had a bee that was going 100%, Corey. And I'm talking about a huge number of my lines. I was still line breeding at that time. I had 6 lines going on to collect these genetic traits.
Yeah.
And I had one line that would kick the brood out. I used to joke, and I said, if you walk past the hive and stomped your feet when you were walking, they start shooting brood out the front end. It was 100% at 18 hours.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I remember seeing a picture of Big O removed on your website. I remember seeing that.
Yeah. And Marla Spivak, the doctor out of Minnesota that coined and actually defined, I believe, now she got some help, of course, with some people in the past. And she was she acknowledged these people, which is rare with researchers lots of times, but she did. And her standard for Hygienic was 48 hours.
Oh my gosh.
48 hours at 85%, I believe it was.
Woo!
If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
At that time. Well, I was smoking that, dude.
Yeah. 18 hours, 100%.
Yeah. And it was repeatable. It wasn't no bull crap.
Yeah.
Well, what I found out, and this was before I got into my SMR kick, because I went from Hygienic and I realized that was a valuable trait, but it wasn't the answer to a survivor bee.
Mm-hmm.
A survivor bee was what's critical. It's what I was breeding for. So I'm also reading and studying Bob Page, and I'm thinking real hard about this closed population breeding group theory. Because keep in mind, I've been line breeding for years, since I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am going down that line, and it's hard for me, because I'm stupid, to switch my thinking from line breeding, vertical breeding, to horizontal breeding.
Yeah.
And, it's counterintuitive in a lot of ways with bees. And that's where a lot of the professors made their mistake. That was what Jeff Harbaugh, he made his mistake, in my opinion. And, but Page was on something. And, which, by the way, Dave Tarpey, I've told you about.
Uh-huh.
I got to tell you this because I don't want to forget it. But his 2 professors to get his PhD, you're not going to believe who they are. Tom Seeley and Bob Page.
Really?
Yeah. And not only that, but that book that Bob Page wrote, the Queen Breeding book, or Queen Rearing, the blue and
Queen Rearing and Bee Breeding, Laidlaw and Page. I love that book.
Well, David has got Laidlaw's
Laidlaw.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Ladshaw. Anyway, this he had Laidlaw's contemporary queen breeding book, and they were making notes to each other and sending it back and forth. This is back before the days where you could do emails and texts and all that crap. David got that book with handwritten notes from both of them.
What?
Yeah,
that's a treasure right there.
It is. I always like David. He's a good guy, and I hope he's doing well. He's one of the few bee researchers that I would listen to.
Awesome. I don't know him too well. I'll keep an ear out for him, though, for sure. I've read some of his stuff, but I just don't know him personally.
Dennis Anderson's another one. He actually had me come, and he came to my bee farm he was from Australia. He's He's the guy that renamed Varroa destructor.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
He reclassified it. He realized that it was erroneous. The guy does more pure research than anybody I've ever seen. I've seen quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And when I walked into his office, he had both walls, and this was a fairly decent sized office with multiple shelves, green manuals, little bitty green manuals. Some were thick, some were tiny, some were medium sized, but they completely covered both walls. I got pictures of this. And I asked him, I said, Dennis, what's those things? And he says, that's all my research.
Are you serious?
I'm not kidding you, man. This guy was, they call him
Wow.
Dr. Mite. And he was with, God, I'm going to butcher this up, CSIR, or it was the government bee project. He was leading the way on all that. And we got into conversation about Tropicalaps and Tropicalaps Clara and Nigerum and Conigrum and all that.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, it was really good. And he had samples of all these that I could see. We got to talk. Yeah. When I went to the U.S. Senate Ag Committee to talk to him about the dangers of beekeeping in 2002, I believe it was, I approached these senators about the dangers that we're seeing. China was one of them, as usual.
Yep.
Very bad, because they were dumping honey on America at that time for 26 cents a pound, and the very best beekeeper. Yeah. And they were just giving it away, and that was to destroy the beekeeping.
Yeah.
Because in our monocultural ag-based system, if you can destroy that particular one, it had a big footprint.
Yep.
But it didn't cost much to do it. And they put a lot of generational beekeepers out of business.
Yep. I don't doubt it.
But anyway, I talked to him about Tropicalaps, and I approached it from a bioterrorism aspect, because I've got a picture. It was timed. This was when we were importing Australian bees, and that's how I got some genetics, some really good genetics, to increase my diversity. Because see, it's been estimated. Tarpey says 500, I believe, if I remember correctly. He's saying all the breeding lines could be traced back to 500 queens.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, which is extremely small. And based on my research and surmisings, I believe it's less than that. I think it's down to 200 to 300. And because I was down there in the middle of Bee Central with these breeders, were queen producers, but they were still breeders. And the way they bred was mammalian genetics. Yeah. And they would pass their best queens to each other. I remember one guy, and I won't use his name because he may not like it, but he's one of the largest queen producers down there. He called me to come and consult with him about a breeding program for his bees, because they started dying off. His bees were having a real hard time surviving, and I was known for a survivor bee. And anyway, we were talking, and I asked him what the problems were, and I come to find out that he'd been using the same queen for 3 years. Yeah, that was his stud queen. Yeah. And I said, there's your problem right there. I said, you're losing your sex allele count. And it's just, what I have found is, my best guess, it takes about 8 years to kill off a line of bees when you breed like that. Just restricting the alleles, narrowing them. Yeah. And people don't realize how important that is. They say, well, it's just a little bit of shot brood. And I said, look, you're on a super family structure with honeybees. And when you start cutting in right out of the chute, the amount of bees that are surviving, you're really hurting yourself. Yeah. So anyway, I'm getting way off track, but I'm having fun doing it. We collected genetics, and I think with the Russian bee, the single trait that I got, besides some diversity, genetic diversity. One of the most important traits that I got, I can remember the day I did it. I remember screaming and that I found it. And I started screaming and hollering. And my wife, she thought I cut my hand off or something. She come running because I was always working with a power saw out in that area. And I seen that trait, and that was auto grooming.
Nice.
And I seen a dance. The bee actually did a dance. It had a mite on it, and it was trying to reach the mite with its hind legs.
Couldn't
And
reach
another bee came over and grabbed the mite.
That is
and
awesome.
I said, I got something here. This is what I've been looking for, because up to that point in time, I'd been studying Apis cerana, the Asian honeybee, and the reason they survive so well is because of that trait. And Steve Shepard, well, I can't remember what his real name. He told me his personal name. It goes by something else, but they both apply. But he's a friend. I hadn't talked to him in ages. We tried to do some grant work together and had the carpet ripped out from under us, and I let him down. But anyway, good guy. He's now working with, what is that guy's name? Paul Stamets with Fungi Perfecta.
Sweet. Yeah. And lowering viral loads and the mycelium extracts.
Yeah, he's the professor that's working with Stamets.
That's awesome.
They're good friends. But we got to talking, was working with each other, and goodness gracious, I got off track. Where was I going with that?
Was it to do with the auto grooming?
Oh yeah. Well, I got real interested in Apis cerana's. You know, they got it. My thinking was that bee's got it licked.
They figured it out. Yeah.
And it's through natural selection over God's breeding program over a long period of time. And I said, well, let's find out what the technique is. Well, lo and behold, when I was learning artificial insemination off of Sue Kobe, guess who was my desk partner?
Who's that?
Steve Shepard.
Was he really?
Yeah.
That's where he was there. AI too. That's too cool.
Yeah, he was there to learn at the same time, and we got to talking and had a great conversation. That's where the friendship got sparked. And he's a good dude. And anyway, I asked him about cerana's. I said, one of the things I was thinking was really out there, but you never know, it might have worked. I said, what about artificially inseminating? By instrumentally inseminating. It's funny how researchers have got to come up with their own names.
Right.
But that doesn't sound like anybody I know. Anyway.
So were they crossing cerana?
I said, why not hybridize them? You know? And he said, we've already tried it.
What happened?
And sterile.
Really? Dang.
Yeah. But so I was thinking the right way, but it had already been tried. I didn't try it. Of course, you can't get cerana's in the United States.
Yeah.
But I guess he said it had already been tried. I don't know who did the work, and I didn't check to see if they were doing it right or anything like that. I learned that later on in life with researchers. Just because they say they've done it, don't check that block yet.
Yeah.
That's what I found out with the natural breeding program that Harbo was working on. And because I did it, he could, of course, nobody believed that I did it because I didn't have a PhD, it wasn't juried, and I didn't have the politics behind me.
Exactly.
But I'll tell you right now, people who had our bees knew we did it.
I know. I've used them before. That's why I wanted to talk to you. So, like, how would you condense it down? Because you obviously did something right. We've talked about natural selection. So did you just leave off antibiotics and miticides and just let nature have her way with them? Or would you?
Well, here's the fun part. This is where it gets fun. Over the years, I'm learning about book learning. about closed population breeding groups.
Mm-hmm.
Line breeding, I'm narrowing everything down into 6 lines. I've got one line is what I call the Purvis Brothers. Brothers was my sons. I named this after my sons. Purvis Brothers Goldline and the Purvis Brother Blue Line.
Okay.
The blue line was of those 6 original Russians that I got behind the scenes when I wasn't supposed to get them.
Yeah.
And I tried to run those lines. Well, the problem, I dropped the Russian line for a lot of reasons. I collected the genetic traits that I wanted off of that, and I consolidated it into the Goldline bee eventually. But the problem with Russian hybrids, and not now because they're not the same bee, but back then was a hybrid Russian was meaner than some of the Africans I'd worked with.
I had that problem because I took a VSHB. No, sorry, I took an allogroomer from Purdue, what they were calling an allogroomer, or their ankle biters. You know, they were saying it's an allogrooming, and I inseminated it with my
That's
VSH.
what I call auto grooming. That's what I call auto grooming. Yeah.
Gotcha. And, well, they were meaner than sin. I don't know why, but it must be something similar to what you were saying with the Russians too.
I experienced the same thing. Certain lines, when you crossed them through insemination, either single drone insemination or collection, homogenized semen or homogenized drone collection, I noticed the same thing. Certain lines, they got hot, but Russians were an automatic guarantee. Yeah.
They're going to be spicy.
So, and so bad so that my wife, we got into arguments. She said, you got to get rid of those bees because you couldn't go out of the house. And that's where I kept at that time, a lot of my breeding lines and the Russians in particular. But I went through the SMR kick. I don't think I got anything out of that, to be honest with you. I may have.
There may be a little bit hidden in there somewhere.
Could be.
Yeah.
But nothing identifiable.
Yeah.
I did get the hygienic trait, a lot of that from that old man.
Yep.
That was from those 2 bees. And I definitely got the auto grooming, or what you're calling auto. I remember him coming into that term when I was getting out, but it was auto grooming, right? That's how it's pronounced.
Yeah. Well, there was 2, and I think it's in that book you referenced, Page and Laidlaw's book, because I think there's auto grooming. That's where they groom themselves.
Oh, and maybe I'm getting confused.
Allo grooming, I think, now I could be wrong, is when they wiggle around and tell them, hey, there's something on my back, get this damn thing off of me, and then the other bee will bite it off. I thought that was allo grooming, and like doing it yourself is auto. I could be wrong though, but
I could have forgot that, but but you get the point.
That was a pretty big factor. Was there any way you could kind of select for that? Or do you just kind of notice it and make a note that this colony,
Well, the way I ended up doing it, it was hard. But what I did was when I collected a very large genetic toolbox, and the way I did that, when I was helping this commercial beekeeper out, he put me in charge of his queens. And I used to buy 50 queens at a time and introduce them into those yards. And so I was able to, and he was cool with it, to collect the genetics of the survivors, okay? And keeping in mind that I'm learning about closed population breeding group. And I was very interested in random selection, that particular variant. There's 2 variants. And I said, okay, I'm going to take those 6 lines that I've been collecting. This was after several years of working with this guy, and anybody who said they had a good bee, I didn't give a shit who they were. I was getting 50 of their bees, and we're going to put them to the test.
Yep, I love it.
And I rapidly went to when I switched over to the large close population breeding group, I brought those 6 lines together. And at that point, I narrowed my breeding program down to 1 subjective evaluation.
Okay.
And 1 black and white evaluation, a binary evaluation. The subjective evaluation was percent weight gain, because the SMR, the biggest mistake the SMR bee made was it was a worthless bee. It wouldn't produce any honey.
Right. Yeah. Who wants that?
Only a scientist would want that. And they,
exactly.
You know, that's why I just love them.
Right.
Anyway.
So what was the other evaluation?
Survival. And the way I did that was I had a large population, close population breeding group, and I wouldn't put too much influence at all on anything, but that's large population breeding group theory. What I had to do, and the hardest work, was standardizing the amount of pressure that I was putting on these bees so that it was as close as possible to all the other bees in that population group. And what I did was we would pick up all the brood diseases. We had 1,000 colonies we were working with, and we picked up all the brood diseases we could, chalk brood, sac brood, European, American. And I would homogenize this mix, this flurry, and I would feed 1,000 colonies this crap.
Ruthless. That's awesome.
That was one thing. Well, the so-called experts got word of that because I couldn't keep my big mouth shut. But Dennis Anderson saved my butt. Dennis Anderson, when they had him over as the key speaker for State Georgia meeting, he defended me. And because what I would do is I would inoculate all these hives with this shit. And I also talked to Dave Tarpey, and the way he had done it or heard it done was taking the what is it, the spore, God, I can't think of the word. The stuff once it's sporulated. You know what I'm talking about. It's when it gets hard, it's the scale. That's the word. The scale, the AFB scale.
AFB scale. Okay, gotcha.
And he would mix it up and spray bottle it, which is more brilliant. It's easier to do. That's why I love David. He had some great ideas, and he had some unbelievable ideas. The guy's brilliant. But anyway, I was feeding it. He was spraying it in the comb. Well, Dennis Anderson, he knew I was getting my butt kicked on this, and people were pointing at me, and all my competitors. It's funny. Everybody wanted my queens except the ones in Georgia, because a professor there, and I won't use his name, did his level best and did a good job of destroying any market that my boys had with that bee in Georgia. He wrote letters and sent them out. Wow. To people. He was not a very good guy. I think he's grown out of that, I hope. But anyway, did everything he could. Dennis Anderson said, no, what he's doing is the right way of doing it. Because see, there's 2 ways of combating foul brood. And that is the 3-gene polygenic trait, hygienic behavior. Or there is also a filter mechanism, philia, in the bee stomach, the foregut, that filters out those spores, and they get digested, passed through.
That's awesome.
And that's the one that you want. And that's what you can breed for. And in fact, when you use the terramycin or any other antibiotic prophylactically, Dennis Anderson did more research than any of us on this. He says, you're not going to have good results. You make them weaker. And not just because the resistance factor of the antibiotics, but also because I don't know if you remember, but we used to be able to buy terramycin in 6.4 ounce bags.
Yep.
Well, you can't do that no more. You got to be a PhD to get it. Anyway, don't get me started. He came to my defense, and he had been in my bee yards twice, and he was really impressed. He told everybody, he says he's got a honeybee that is resistant to Varroa mite. Yeah, he said it's real.
Yeah.
And I've checked his breeding program out, and he's the real deal. Well, that you can imagine what that did for us.
Yeah.
That's why all those professors used to come when I'd speak at state meetings. They'd sit in the back and try to hide. It's hilarious. I can list some names, man, and I point them out. How you doing, Dr. So-and-so? How you doing, Dr. So? Oh, I used to just piss them off. And I had one that just ran out of the room. He was so mad. Yeah, he's a big namer too. We have to read his stuff all the time in ABJ or Bee Culture. I think Bee Culture is more political than ABJ, at least it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you don't have a PhD,
you're questioned.
You better have patience and a good heart.
Yep.
Neither of which I have.
But your breeding program was damn effective. I know that much.
Well, I could tell you, there's an old saying. I don't know who came up with that term. I know you've heard it, but nothing. The best revenge is success.
Yep, exactly.
And they couldn't argue with my bees. And,
exactly.
I mean, everybody. That's how I got to the U.S. Senate Ag Committee. Everybody was writing their governors and their congressmen and everything, because at one time with the Varroa and trachea mite, we were thinking the bees were going to go extinct. I knew that. I knew better than that, but a lot of people thought that. They were scared to death. It was hard to keep the bees alive. This was back before small hive beetle.
Yeah.
But, they really worked up about it. And so they're writing all their politicians from dog catcher up. And I got a call from several of them wanting me to come and speak to them about the bees. And so I started talking to congressmen and aides and senators. And anyway, my ego got fed pretty good during that time too. I thought they'd listen. Well, they did, but they gave money to the doctors.
Of course.
That's and that really, that hurt.
Yeah.
That at that time it hurt. But the funny thing is, when I reflect back on it, I told them from the very beginning, one guy in particular, I said, I will help you get funding. Well, then we got into it where through his own insecurity or whatever, we became almost mortal enemies.
Yeah.
Man. And at that point, I actually ended up giving him the means through another company to receive a large grant, a very large grant that I thought I was going to get, which I wasn't going to. And I'm glad I didn't, because the golden handcuffs that came with that, they'd had a microscope up my rectal area.
Yep.
And I don't work good like that.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because like everything I've done so far, it's all personally funded out of my obsession / insanity. I haven't taken any grant money. Nobody tells me what to do. I do it the way I want to do it. And I love it that you touched on the closed population breeding model too, because that's what I'm trying to move into. And from the same book, the same influence, and exactly the same reason, like you said, where they were focusing on one trait too much and narrowing the genes, where that's the great thing about the closed population breeding model is you keep that level of diversity too, while you keep working towards So that does me a lot of good to hear you say that, just because most people aren't interested in what I'm doing or the nuances of it. But that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I felt like you were a mentor whenever I was trying to shape myself as a breeder, and I felt like you were one of the only ones, if not the only one, that took the high road or the hard road of natural selection, then adding your spin on it, so it's actually a utilitarian bee that can handle what's out there, not just a lopsided
Well,
pipe.
the tracheomite was one of the first genetic things that we overcome. It was 100%. It's a dominant gene, and so all you have to do is have it in your gene pool and then provide pressure. And so we were able to breed that out very quickly. It got to the point where I had trouble finding tracheomite, because I was doing tracheomite dissections and taking photographs and grading the tracheas and all that for 50 sample bees. And I had the DNA in a freezer all the way back to my first pedigree. And it was fun switching over to the large close population breeding group, but I did it. And all the way back from the very original 3 hives, because I've been a breeder and stuff. But I remember, oh God, I got so many stories I could tell you, but I got into it with somebody that was stealing our bees. Oh, you're not going to believe who it was, and I don't have the money to fight him. So it wasn't a commercial beekeeper. Let me put it that way. And he was a big name, and they were harvesting my genetics for their bee line, stealing the genetics and not giving me any credit. And I got up in an address. It was about 600 people, if I remember correctly. I was the key speaker. And I told them, I said, I've got DNA samples all the way back to my original 3 hives. And if you try to steal my bees, I've got proof that they're my bees. Well, they didn't know I didn't have any money, but it scared them enough to stop stealing my name. See, not only did they get the genetics, which actually worked pretty good for the bee community in general, because it was another marketing avenue, and they could distribute, because there was a lot of people that bought into their hype, and now it's solid hype, but I still won't buy their bees. I don't care if it's the last honeybee out there, and they're probably closer to my bees than anything else.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
That was, like I said earlier, they're too easy to knock off. That's the problem. Like, with breeding, there's not a lot of money in it for the amount of, because like what you did and what you detailed out with AI and the closed population, nobody does that.
No, well,
even the big producers typically don't, like you were saying.
The disease exposure, and then inseminating 1,000 queens every year with 20 queen mothers, or 20%, 10, 15, that were evaluated for percent weight gain. 10, 15, 20% were my queen mothers. The rest, including themselves, because I wanted to keep them in the family structure, close population breeding group. Always wanted to talk to Bob Page about that one. But anyway, we would take the drones from the other survivors, no matter how, there was a limit. But if they made it through the winter with a baseball-sized cluster of bees, they counted.
Yep.
Because what I exposed them to was severe.
Yes.
And we exposed them to tracheomite, we exposed them to Varroa mite loads, and I'll tell you, it's hard to do that. You have to have samples of bees that are heavy carriers. And then there's a lot of techniques that you can do in the field to increase the exposure to these diseases. One is yard feeding.
Oh, yeah.
And it works really good. And then rotation of hives so that you get a real uniform drift.
Okay.
And drone banks. which are just really healthy queenless hives that you make queenless and then go back in. They're a pain to work because you got to go back in there about every 5 days to kill the queen cells. And even then you'll have virgins come into the area and sometimes take residence and you lose that hive. But we would put drone comb in each hive, a Purco drone comb. It was green frame, so it was easy for the people, my boys, to identify it. And we would let that stuff hatch out. Because I remember reading a guy who was a natural beekeeper said that that's how that drone comb thing got going, because they would let the queen lay the drones in it, let them raise out the drones, and then once they capped, pull that frame out and freeze it, right? And then put it back in the hive and let them clean it up. Well, that got me to thinking, first of all, drones are very attractive to Varroa mite, right?
Yep.
So I said, that's another way of providing Varroa pressure on my population, my large group. And that was another way I introduced Varroa mite. But it got to the point very quickly where we no longer had trachea mite. We couldn't find it.
Yeah.
It was gone. It was gone, man. And when I
That's
finally
awesome.
got out of beekeeping, because that grant thing was the last straw. That hurt.
It's a big blow.
Yeah. And at that point in time, I stressed our marriage so hard because of the amount of work that I was doing.
I mean,
you know what it's like to inseminate 1,000 queens in one season. You got to do it quick too. And
I've not done near that many.
I'll tell you what, you'd have migraines for about 3 weeks.
I bet so.
Because you got to produce the virgins too, and then you got to get them to lay in. And you know how hard that process is. But
the schedule ties from queen rearing to when they emerge to how old they are to banking them to collecting drones to I mean, you have to tie multiple schedules together.
Yeah, and there's techniques to all that, you know.
Yeah.
I one thing that helped me speed up the process is when it finally dawned on me that I was having trouble with homogenizing the semen. Wait, that professor that I was having trouble with actually taught me that. And the way he taught me was because he told everybody he was going to do inseminated queens. And therefore, they were going to be the answer to everything. Well, he tried it in 1 year. He tried it 1 year, and he didn't come and talk to me. He talked to Sukobi, which he didn't go to her class because his ego too big, I think. But I'm still a little bitter about this guy. I need to get over that. Darn it. Yeah, I need to talk to God about that one. But
did he have a process with homogenization?
He was homogenizing the semen and killing it. And he didn't know how to inseminate. You don't just, Sue was wrong in one thing. She said, I can teach anybody to inseminate. I think, what was it? You remember, she'd say an hour, 2 hours or something, a real small number of times. I'm going to tell you right now, to be a good inseminator, you're going to have to do a couple thousand queens.
Yeah, I completely agree. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to, and I would revert and do stupid stuff. Like if I didn't do it for a season, I would get in a rut whenever I started and then get back in the groove. You're right, it takes a ton of just cranking them out. Well, hands-on, just like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. What I found out, I was homogenizing the semen, and you can do it. You have to be very careful with it.
Yeah.
When you're doing the mixing, that's where you get into problems. Well, the original, and I think this was Laidlaw that come up with this, was mixing it and then taking it and putting it in a centrifuge. I tried that. I had a centrifuge and spinning it and then getting the plug and doing all that. Well, that killed more semen than anything. And since the migration of the semen to the egg in a queen is mechanical, not biological, and they don't swim to the egg, they're delivered to the egg. You end up with a lot of drones in your worker brood when you do that. So what I ended up doing was I realized if my population group is big enough and I'm inseminated enough queens, which I was. If I have, take it a step higher and collect the drones and do my homogenizing of my drones in a big drone bank instead.
That's what I did.
Yeah, it's really saved me a lot of time. And
I didn't have a centrifuge, but and this could be my weak brain, but I did the same thing. Like I'll mark all of them that are drone colonies and I'll catch. And then I have it's just what same thing Sue used. It was like a bug dorm. She had a homemade one, but then she had a bug dorm too. And so I just take all the drone cages and throw them all in the same cage and they're buzzing around, homogenizing. And then this is kind of probably stupid and it may not even hold up scientifically, is after I collect, I'll let it sit in a tube for a day or two at room temp. I just figured they're swimming too, maybe. So,
well, actually, they don't because they're coiled up.
Man.
They're
are they
coiled
really?
up.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't come alive until later, as I understand it. I'm pretty sure that I've looked at them under the scope before, and they stay coiled. They're in a stasis. But yeah, I had all kinds of different ideas. One thing that I tried to do was get with a chemist to recreate, I don't want to call it seminal fluid because that's not it, but the fluid that is in the spermatheca.
Okay.
The queen produces or
To
produce.
keep it viable.
Yeah, and I thought that would be in my opinion, the perfect storage media.
Oh yeah.
For the semen, because as you know, semen storage is a weak point with beekeeping. Insemination.
I try to keep it in live queens.
That's where I like to keep it, bro.
Yep, exactly. But it's difficult, and my breeders get the same non-preferential treatment as all my open mated queens, so they don't get treated, they don't get babied, so everybody's in the same hardship boat. But I think we're on the same page. Natural selection. Whenever it gets,
I called it.
Burn it
when
out.
I talk down in the Bible Belt, and I'm a believer, but what I used to say was it's natural selection on steroids, or you can just call it God's breeding program.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it was and that came across pretty egotistical, I guess, now that I think about it, but
it's
not
true.
But it works really well. We had a bee at the end, Corey, that my production queens that I was producing, we actually got to a point where we had 1 year, we had 96% survival in the breeders. And,
That's
we're talking
awesome.
about over 1,000 bees. And
yeah, without
you just,
getting babied too.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It got
Yeah.
to the point where the program was a success and people knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really wanting my bees. I had a guy the other day ask me, do you have queens? Do you still produce queens? And they'll once in a while they Google my name or something, and they'll read about what we did, or they'll see a presentation I gave years ago, and I'll get calls or they'll contact me somehow, but pretty much taking my phone off, and I just teach other beekeepers, beginner beekeepers now.
Yeah.
When I started, Kim Flodham, who's a friend of mine, told me, he said at that time, no, he didn't tell me that. It was, what was his name? Can't remember his name. He was the manager for the Day branch down in Florida. Shit, he was a friend too. We used to talk all the time, but at that time, about 80 to 90% of all the hives in North America were commercial. Well, about 10 years ago, when I went and actually that was about 7 years ago, when I went and stayed at Kim Flodham's house for a while, and we got to talking beekeeping. I love Kim, but he doesn't understand what I was doing, and since I don't have a PhD, he thinks I'm crazy. So
I'm
anyway,
in the same boat. I understand.
Kim's all I can say. Anyway, and I'd say that to his face, and he knows it because I have. And but we got to talking, and he told me then, and he would know. He said that 95% of the beehives now are hobbyists.
Whoa!
And that
Total
yeah,
flip.
yeah. And I'm telling you what, we can thank China for that, and it actually is working in our favor. I truly believe that.
Diversity.
Diversity.
Yeah.
You got it. And I tell people, and I know that when I teach them beekeeping, and I said, you're going to save the bee. And they say, what? I'm just going to have one hive. I'm just going to have two hives. And I said, exactly. And they're going to swarm on you, and you won't even know it.
Yep.
And they're going to be exposed. And one of my favorite openings when I talk to people in classes is I'll say, how many breeders we got in here? Because a lot of people know I was breeding bees. At least that's the way I'm introduced lots of times. And they say, nobody raises their hand. I said, everybody who's got a beehive needs to raise their hand.
Yeah.
And I say, you're breeding something, you just may not know it. And that's Varroa mite.
Yep.
And then I told you I was going to come back to that. And that really took me a step forward on some things.
What was that? I
realized the way I was inoculating my hives with disease, I was also inoculating them with good mite genetics. Because the way I was breeding is I would let the bees die off. I didn't treat, and I let them die off. So the dangerous genetics, the super virulent mites, not just the chemically resistant mites, but the super virulent mites, because when you create a vacuum, which is what these strips and all that bullshit that people use creates, when you create that vacuum, nature abhors the vacuum. And what ends up happening is you develop a faster breeding or a more vigorous or more virulent mite that is chemically resistant.
Exactly.
And at the same time, you're poisoning that lipid with lots of times they use Coumaphos that has a 50-year half-life,
in your comb.
In the comb. And that's like pasting the baby's room in your nursery of your house.
DDT.
With an organophosphate, a known carcinogen.
Exactly.
But there's a lot of professors that got good paperwork done on that, white paper on that, but sure. And that was the biggest mistake we made. When these two pests, Varroa and Trachea mite, hit us, we could have activated the extension services and went out and found those feral colonies that were surviving. Collected them, and if we'd have known about mite genetics, like Tom Seeley knows, and I know, and Dave Tarpey knows, and Dennis Anderson knows. There's a couple, I hate comparing myself to them because I'm nothing compared to those guys, but I understand it. And if we could have collected those populations of mites and bees, we'd be laughing about the problems that we're having with honeybees right now. Because the feral populations back then were humongous. They were massive. Yeah, it was just massive. That's where it all came from. And the bee breeders or bee producers down in the South, Texas, wherever, Louisiana, California, Georgia, Florida, they relied on those for the drone stock. And when that all went away, that's why the population of the queen mothers dropped off so quickly. And we started having brood viability issues. I mean, when I first got into it, Corey, I don't know if you were in it this time, and I wish that I got a picture of this. I swear, I always think about it, and I said, I don't know how many times I used to go out in the yard and pull out a frame of capped brood with no misses.
Zero holes.
Zero holes, the whole frame, front and back.
Slabs.
And I say to myself, why couldn't I have took a picture? Well, the reason was because I didn't know what was coming. And even with a closed population breeding group, which we were known for strong brood viability.
Yep.
But even with closed population breeding group, you're not going to have 100% brood viability.
Yep.
Especially if you mix the drone stock from your queen mothers.
Right. Yep. Well, that kind of ties into a thought that I had of one way that we might be able to overcome this is like a small army of micro breeders. I call them like micro breweries. Well, you pointed out there's so many more hobbyists now. Well, there's actually a few people that have 100, 200 colonies that are competent on genetics and are really interested in breeding. So that's why one reason why I wanted to interview you is to glean some of that wisdom from somebody who did amazing things in breeding work, and B, to encourage them, that more people picking this up and doing, like I'm modeling myself after you, the direction I've taken. Hopefully more people will pick up on this, and we can have multiple closed populations that aren't just Harbo or aren't just VP, but then you can make those crosses too and have such better diversity while moving forward with resistance.
Well, I have thought about this because a long time, and it's been decades, I actually presented that idea to the Georgia State Beekeeping Association. I gave away 600 blue line and gold line inseminated queens.
Wow.
All they had to do
my gosh.
Yeah, how many thousands of dollars was that worth?
Exactly.
And the professor went nuts on that. That was the only grant money I ever took, was from the Georgia State Beekeeping Association, a $2,000 grant, and I would pay that back right now.
Exactly. Right.
I mean, there's some good people in that group, but my God, the politics behind that, they crucified me. And
that's ridiculous,
they always start out this way. They always say, it's not personal. I said, the hell it ain't personal.
Here we go. Yeah.
It's like, I love you, but anyway. Yeah, right. I mean, I'd hear that and I'd almost smack them right in the mouth, It's like, give me a break. But I knew what was coming. But anyway, I couldn't sell a queen in Georgia.
Gosh.
Yeah, after he got on his kick, and you probably know who I'm talking about.
I may.
You text me and I'll give you the name.
So how do you, if this pipe dream potentially that I'm thinking
yeah. I was thinking about this, Corey, and since I've known you and I've watched you, I've been watching, dude, and I'm impressed.
I'm still growing. I got a lot to figure out, man.
Well, one of your biggest strengths is your people skills.
Oh, well,
and I thought, I really believe, I think if anybody could pull this off, it would be you. I looked at the whole idea that you're talking about, basically forming a large closed population breeding group across the nation. I even approached Georgia about that. I approached the senators that I talked to about that, because, the way I was in the military, I was there for a short time. But, if you come to the colonel and you say, this is why it's screwed up, if you didn't have an answer to fix it,
right,
you're going to be grabbing your ass on the way out of the office.
Yep.
And well, my answer was to develop a large closed population breeding group. And I offered that. I said, we can start with my stock right now, which is small scale to what you need across the country.
Yeah.
And we can do it regionally to try to match the weather patterns and stuff. Mm-hmm. or grow zones. You know what I'm talking about, because it's different. Like Colorado Springs, completely different than Georgia.
Yeah.
But anyway, I ran that by them. They actually asked me how much money it would cost to do that, and I told them I could fix this problem if you'd let me do it. And I said I need 25,000 colonies in the Orlando, Florida area, and I need 25,000 colonies in the San Joaquin Valley area, and we'll have this problem solved in about 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And they said, well, how much? And I said, I'll do it for free. Well, I found out later from some lobbyists and some politicians, big politicians I was working with, actually formed a company with one of them. He said, that's why you didn't get the money. If you'd have said 25 million, you'd have got it.
Oh my gosh. I bet he's right too.
Yeah. I mean, American people, well, they're all people, we're a bunch of chickens, you know. We see a big old pile of grain and we're eating it and we're all happy, and a scrawny little hen will be picking out grain from a dung heap, and one of them in the good grain will see it and they'll just all run over there to take that grain, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without even thinking about it. And well, it didn't happen, but what is happening is the diversity from our hobbyist beekeepers are going to save our ass. That's my opinion. They're the ones that's going to do it with direction from guys like you and me, or not me, but you.
Oh yeah, definitely you, Dan. Well, that's why I wanted to interview you, because man, you know how whenever people like are trailblazers and they blaze a trail and nobody pays attention to it whenever they did it, and it's freaking amazing, and then later they're like, holy, look at this trail, and then somebody else gets the credit for it. I think that's Dan Purvis, because like, dude, I think you're ahead of your time, man. Like you laid little nuggets of how you did it and how to best go about it that had a huge influence on me. So that's one reason I wanted to do these interviews too. So maybe you had an influence on me. Maybe I'll have an influence on somebody else that's going to take what I did and make it even better. You know,
I think it will be. I'm really thankful for this opportunity, Corey, because one of my biggest fears is because, first of all, I did that Myers-Briggs test on personalities, the 16 different personality types.
Okay.
I'm all the way down in the lower right-hand corner, that corner slot. That's what I am. I'm not real good with people. And anybody who's had a lot of time with me, when I was in the go mode, I was like a bull in the china shop. And you're not like that from what I've seen. And I think if anybody can pull this off, I think it's you. And I hope it happens. I would tell you this, there's some bees, believe it or not, I thought about starting up the Goldline bee again, but call it America's bee, because there's some bees at 10,000 feet on Pikes Peak, America's mountain.
What?
And they're survivor feral colonies.
Are you kidding me?
And I thought, man, it'd be neat to take a bunch of small mating nukes with queen cells in them, capped up in a backpack, and put them up there to collect some of those genetics. That's another thing you can do, collecting genetics. There's techniques to do that, to build your gene pool up. I did a lot of that. What I did was I would go into areas that had survivor bees in that I thought. That's how I collected the mellifera
okay.
bee. And
did you just open mate with them? Like let your queens open mate in certain areas, or?
What I did was I took hives and mating nukes into this peninsula that happened to be, it doesn't have to be a peninsula. If you know, you'd have to do a little research, but find out where people are keeping bees. And if you find an area that's not keeping bees, and you go out there someday and you put a little honey out during a dearth and you watch a bee start showing up, depending on how many, I learned that from beelining, then what you can do is say, hey, there's some feral colonies here. That's how I found that mellifera. I seen these little, they didn't even look like honeybees at first. They were coming in and I'm like, what is that? I thought it was some kind of fly.
Yeah.
And I got to look at it and said, no, and then it dawned on me, that's a mellifera. So I brought a bunch of mating nukes out there with queen cells. And what I did was timing is important. Usually if it's the way you get around people's kept bees, because they'll feed bees. And and I know that they start kicking out drones at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so the drone stock dies off from managed domestic bees. But wild bees don't do that because they're not getting fed. And the population's usually a little smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I looked at it, plus mellifera was a good, strong winter survivor, cool weather survivor. So I went out twice and I collected them through the New World Carniolan virgins that I had. And for whatever reason, I decided to use that line. This was when I was still line breeding. But I brought out virgins twice that year, very early in the spring, very early, when there were no drones from managed bees flying around, is the way I looked at it, and very late in the season. And lo and behold, I got them, because I had, when I was still in those lines, they started showing up with the smoky wings and smaller. They're a beautiful bee, man. I'm talking, they're like little shards of anthracite coal.
That's
it's
awesome.
Just black and shiny. There's no stripes, smoky colored wings. And anyway,
cool.
we got that put into that big population breeding group, and the only thing we selected for, and I tried to keep it as the least amount of subjective evaluation as possible. You know, I could get anybody to go out there and kick a hive and tell me if it's got bees in it or not. That's the binary side. The only subjective side was the percent weight gain. And the reason I went with percent weight gain instead of overall weight gain was because percent weight gain was more accurate in telling me how good the production was. Because and I know, trying to manage bees so that they're all totally the same is virtually impossible.
It's like a horse race.
Right. You do your best, and that's all you can do. But standardization was important in my breeding program. I tried to do that as best I could. But with the subjective evaluation, which was what the evaluation process was, the weakness in the so-called natural breeding program that Harbo had, and several other people had, because they were looking at things the wrong way. And survival was the most important genetic trait. And then you had to have them viable for money making. Right. Otherwise, nobody's going to want the bee.
Exactly. Commercially viable.
And so, you know, the percent weight gain, I don't know if you're familiar with that technique.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
I think Kobe is the first one to introduce me to. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe it might have been. And anyway, for whatever reason, I decided, rightfully so, that was the best technique to evaluate instead of overall weight gain, because you know, and I know you could have some hives that produce 20 pounds of honey, or then you have some hives that produce 150 pounds of honey. Those are two extremes, and they're not a good example. But what I'm saying is, let's say 50 versus 70, but you got 3 pounds of bees in one hive, and you got 10 pounds of bees in the 70 pounders, and who's making more honey per bee?
Right.
And that's the way we went. We went that route, and we weighed the colonies that way. We digitally weighed every colony on a regular basis. It was work. Awesome. It was a lot of work, but it
paid off.
Yeah, I wished. You know, I look back on it and I think, boy, it sure would have been nice to get some credit for that stuff. But you know what? That's just my ego speaking. I'm just glad that I'm able to pass some of this on, because we paid so dearly for that. It almost cost me my marriage. I had 2 heart attacks from heat stroke.
Yep.
The heat stroke caused.
Did you tell me about that when you were down and like it was ridiculously hot, and you're kind of down in was it North Georgia, or was it in Georgia?
South Georgia, Broxton, Georgia, down by Baxley, where all the beekeeping's done down there, close to the Florida border.
Yeah.
And we had 55 colonies, triple deeps, down in a hole that had about an inch of standing water. And when I pulled in there that morning, it was 104 degrees by 9 o'clock. And I worked those hives that whole day, and I started blacking out, which was not unusual in that heat, but this time it got really bad, and felt like a spike drove through my head, and I said I better quit, and I started blacking out real bad.
Whew.
And I had heat stroke, and for 3 years I couldn't even go outside when it was 80 degrees or higher.
Couldn't tolerate it.
I was touched by the sun, the way they say.
You were. Well, Dan, I know.
Bless his heart.
Maybe I wish it would have worked out better for you. 2, beekeeping's ridiculously hard to monetize, and I don't think that the industry gives credit where credit's due for the exact reasons you outlined. But I'm honored you took time to talk to me. I'm freaking stoked to know you, which we have ridiculous amount of interests that are similar. I'm glad you would do this with me. Glad you did what you did, and that we're able to talk about it and dig it up so I can tell other people this is the dude and this is the right way to do things. And then hopefully, this next round of generation behind me will maybe do even better things.
Well,
thank
you so much for the opportunity. And it's an answered prayer almost. It's almost emotional, because I don't want this stuff I don't want it to die with me. And we paid too much blood, sweat, tear, money.
Yep.
And my boys, I mean, you say beehives around my boys and they start running.
Yeah, my kids are the same way.
Because they work bees. We put them through high school and college, and we taught them work ethics that way. And but I was hard on them. And
I'm that way with my kids too. It's for the better though. Well, then they'll appreciate if they've worked bees hard and then they get another job maybe they like, or it works out better for them, they'll probably appreciate it more. Kind of like
they will.
Throwing hay, back in the day.
I'll tell you what, I have 4 boys, 1.5 years apart, every one of them. And all 4 of them, they're men now, with families, a lot of them. And they all tell me the same thing. They said, we know how to work. And I used to tell them that. And it was because of that. And I'll tell you the biggest mistake I made on that, looking back, and I hope you hear this, but remember to have fun with them. Remember to take those hunting trips or those fishing trips, or just turn it off and go have fun with them, because that original guy I worked with, he told me this and I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. He said, I taught my kids how to work, but I didn't teach them how to like it.
Yeah.
And that's what I taught my boys. I taught them how to work, but I didn't teach them how to like it. And they're not going to like anything if it's drudgery.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I mean, they'll get the work ethics, but they need to have fun every once in a while.
I'm glad you said that too, because it's kind of affirmation to me. But there for a while, I just worked all out. Like I didn't quit my day job, and I did bees full time. And then I kind of just run myself in the dirt, and I have to learn the hard way. I've got to get punched in the face before I acknowledge something sometimes. And I'm doing a little bit better at that. I think it's a personality trait. Like I feel like I got to be working all the time. If I'm sitting around, I'm feeling like something's not right.
You're a driven person like I am. And that's, it's got its positives and its disadvantages.
You're exactly right. I get to where I just have to schedule time. Like we're going fishing Sunday. I don't care what's going on, and that's been working out pretty good. But that's absolutely good advice.
It was hard for me to turn it off.
Yeah, I mean, it is for me.
We'd go, but lots of times I was still
somewhere else.
Yeah,
and, same here. Thinking of what you ought to be doing, or what you need to be doing, or what you want to do next, or
yes, sir.
I'm guilty of that. Well, Dan, I've kept you on here a long time. Maybe we can do some more in the future or something. But thank you for what you've done for beekeeping and breeding, for being an example. Thanks for being a friend. Honored to be able to share this conversation with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you for making an old man feel good.
My pleasure. You earned it, man.
Enjoy
your evening with Rosie. Tell her I said hey.
I will, and you do the same with yours.
We'll holler at you next time we're in Colorado.
Yes, sir. Come by. You better stop and visit. Don't tell me you come to Colorado and you didn't.
You'll be the first stop.
All right, man.
Thanks again, Dan.
Take care.
Catch you later.